Another episode of the Wild Strength podcast where we talk about all things wild and all things strength and everything in between. Today, my guest is Mike Barnes, and his walk up song is It's a Long Way to the Top by AC/DC. So we're going to play a little bit of that. Oh, I feel like that's perfect. I think that's the first like rock song that anyone has chose, which surprises me because I feel like rock would be a typical genre for a walk-up song.
Yeah.
But anyways, that's a great one. But like I said, I have Mike Barnes here. I've actually known of Mike for a while now. We have quite a few similar connections in strength and conditioning. But I'll let you introduce yourself, and then we'll kind of get into the episode.
Sure. Whitney, you're with the NSCA, I guess, you're not currently there, are you?
I'm not, no, but I was for a short bit. Yep.
Yeah. I was there a number of years ago for the better part of a decade. But I was the director of education for a number of years. I worked in the NFL for a number of years with the 49ers. I currently own my own business in strength conditioning and fitness, where I work with different populations as well. So that's kind of my background. And, before that, it was grad school. And but I've got a few of the NSCA certs as well. And I was involved in a few of those too on the implementation of the TSAC program as well. So
Did my master's back before COVID. Jay Dawes was my advisor. And I remember, of course, there's so many names here and around the area. And so I remember your name coming up. And then, once I kind of moved back here and was in connection with Joel Rather, he had mentioned you as well. So things
yeah,
kind of came full circle, and definitely glad to have you on here. I was kind of telling Mike before we started, I generally come into these episodes with not a plan in mind. We just see where the conversation goes. But I kind of want to do something a little bit different with this one. Like Mike mentioned, he has a long, extensive background in performance and strength and conditioning and training. And he didn't mention himself, but he does a lot with hunting and backpacking and mountain fitness, as we'll call it, and actually has a book coming out. Maybe we can talk about that in a little bit at the end. But I have 4 myths that I have kind of curated myself, but they have certainly come from things that people have either told me that they believe, or just questions that people have asked me. And so, like I said, maybe it takes a whole hour to get through one of them, or maybe we're able to get through all 4 of them. But the first one that I have here, where did that go? For one, I need to carry a heavy pack for miles and miles and miles all the time to train for a hunt or to train to be in the mountains.
well, I would possibly would be my
Mm-hmm.
answer.
Yeah, I would agree.
So, I think that immediately goes through my mind is, Colorado September elk archery season. And with that, I know kind of what my limits are.
Mm-hmm.
And I think they're fairly, respectable as far as like, okay, if you can do 8 or 10 a day with 40 pounds, give or take, that might be adequate enough to get you manage a week or a season. And I think that if you said, okay, well, that's kind of the iconic hunt. I mean, I would imagine that comes to your mind as, oh, great, mountain hunting season. Let's, early September, all that stuff. But if you had to go to, say, the Brooks Range and do a sheep hunt, you might be putting in a lot more miles. And I've heard some miles that are kind of scary, 20 a day.
Yeah.
And you might find sheep, you might not. So I don't know if a heavy pack would be ideal, but they're going to, whoever you're with, I've never been on an Alaskan hunt, but I'd imagine if you got to put in a bunch of miles, they're going to try to manage that the best you can. And so to really build that, let's just call it ultra endurance, might be a good
Mm-hmm.
idea. I know that my limits are going to probably be, and if I'm in the middle of the season, well, check that. I'm going to say, middle of the summer, if I can get into 8 to 10, either scouting with a moderate pack, 35 to 40 pounds, that's probably pretty good. And
Mm-hmm.
And if I'm going to go once a week on that and then complement with a shorter, heavier hike, would really kind of be my approach. I'd be curious to know what you do too, Whitney.
Yeah. Yeah. And I like that you didn't emphasize, but you said once a week, right? I think where most people come to me is like, for example, the Western Hunt Fest that's going on, right? They started this ruck challenge, and I've even talked to the guys who are running it, and they noticed that it was next to impossible to keep up with this ruck challenge that they put out there because it was heavy load for miles and miles every single day, right? Like you
Yeah,
mentioned once a week that you're going out 8 to 10 miles a moderate weight, and I think that's perfect. I would do the exact same where if I'm preparing for a hunt or a hike or whatever, where I know I'm going to be carrying even 60 plus pounds, right, for 8 to 10 miles, I'm not going to put that amount of weight on my back. I'm going to put a moderate amount of weight, and I'm going to maybe once a week go out there and have that weight on my back and do a hike or a trail or even just a flat trail or walk.
right.
And then I think the in between is what's important, right? So I don't know if you listened to the one where I had Joel Rather on here, but we mentioned just the different like qualities that are important of training. So you need to be strong to be able to carry a bunch of weight. You need to have some sort of endurance. So how can I build that endurance? Or I guess kind of the question sometimes is, well, how am I building endurance if I'm not rucking all the time? Well, you can do that a number of ways. You can ride the bike, you can go for walks, you can go for runs, you can do carries, you can do sled drags. So yeah, I think the biggest question that usually comes to me is like, why are you not rucking every single day? People
Yeah,
think because, and I'm interested in your thoughts. Rucking every single day is the quickest way to tear yourself down and
yeah.
to get out there and find out, oh, I've been carrying all this load, and then you're probably going to crash sooner than you think that you would if that's the case.
Well, you do if you do any activity with that type of load or intensity or some equivalent there, you're going to have some problems, probably some soft tissue problems. So
Mm-hmm.
chronic type issues as well. But I kind of go back to what you just kind of referred to is let's just say you're going to ruck twice a week, one heavy day, shorter distance, one lighter day, longer distance. Okay, so what do I do in between? Well, really, we want to build up endurance, and then
Mm-hmm.
with that, if you keep in mind that the methods are many, I don't care how you do it,
Mm-hmm.
but the principles are few. So to progressively overload, to monitor your endurance, to measure it first, to do an assessment. And, I mean, the things that I want to do, just, I mean, personally speaking, I want to do the incline this summer with a pack on. I'll probably time trial it early, sometime early May, and then I'm going to probably time trial it once a month to see where I am. And then I'm going to mountain bike quite a bit, and I like to do some trail running as well. So that's
Mm-hmm.
going to be my endurance piece. I know that if it's managed correctly, I should be able to get in 6 days of some type of endurance quality. And then to me, that's probably most important. Just personally, I don't really have a problem with my strength piece, but I do want to keep my strength up enough to be capable to lift, hopefully come out, a heavy pack out is really, but even then you're like, okay, well, Barnes, you're fine. You're 200 plus pounds. You can lift whatever, say a 90-pound pack. That's fine, but can you do it for maybe, up to, a day or two, possibly, hopefully not, but,
Yeah. Yeah.
but you got to go where the animals are. So that's kind of my thought. And, Whitney, feel free to jump in too, because you've got quite a bit of experience with
Yeah.
training and how to complement.
And I always kind of refer back to, I obviously have more experience in the tactical setting, and then kind of only in the last couple of years I've gotten into hunting. So then I kind of refer back to that experience, which I would, and you might even say the same, that I would train those folks very similarly to how I would train someone who's preparing for maybe a backcountry hunt, and that like they're not going to be rucking every day either. Now, if they don't, I think in the past that was the belief, right? To ruck every day, to run every day, whatever, to get to do the things that they needed to do. But fortunately, the military and even fire departments and law enforcement, police departments have started to embed human performance programs with professionals who recognize that rucking every day is not what's best for you. And I spent time in a training pipeline And once again, these guys, part of the PT test they had to pass was a 60-pound or a 3 mile ruck with 60 pounds. They rucked once a week. And, people kind of reflect on that or look back on that and think, oh my goodness, how are they able to, knowing, right, someone who comes in here knowing nothing, not knowing much about training, how are you able to pass that ruck if you only rucked once a week? Well, they have running 3 to 4 times a week on top of that.
Right.
There's strength training 3 to 4 times a week on top of that. There's swimming 3 to 4 times a week on top of that. So that
Nice.
also is another way to build endurance,
Right.
and a very low impact way to build endurance at that. So
Yeah.
yeah, I would definitely agree that throwing the pack on and every single day going out there 60 plus pounds is maybe not your best bet. And I'm always curious to know why people think that equates to. And I think maybe if you're new and curious your thoughts on this, someone who maybe hasn't trained for a hunt like that, they might see some sort of benefit at first from rucking every single day. But I can guarantee you, after about a month of that, they're not, probably even sooner, but I'm going to say a month at the longest, they're not going to feel too great.
I was going to say, yeah, probably a month. But if they're, their initial adaptation is going to kind of go up pretty quick. And let's,
Yeah.
whatever, choose your favorite course to do it on with your favorite weight and say, okay, and then all of a sudden they come down by 10%. Yeah, those initial gains come pretty quick. And then as you get closer to your genetic potential, you got to come up with some variations in your program. And I think part of it too, Whitney, is you kind of think about a hunt and you got, so this individual has a bow on their back and a pretty big pack on, and they want to mimic that. So your first is, I'm just going to mimic what these people do, and okay, that will take you so far, and then you have to incorporate some variation. And like you just said, and what I'd like to kind of underscore a little bit is that non-weight bearing exercises, the
Mm-hmm.
stationary bike or mountain biking is an easy exercise on the joints and doesn't have that intense, obviously, weight bearing. And then you throw some weight on your back too. So that could be something to keep in mind. And that's the things that I like to keep in mind. So if if you're
Yeah.
like, I don't like to mountain bike, I'm just not going to do it. If that's your case, then we're not going to incorporate that. But if someone likes to row, or else they like to do these capacity workouts and they have a big box gym they want to go to, okay, well let's move that into your program as well. So again, the principles are few, but the methods are many. We can get you where you need to be in order to develop endurance.
Yeah. And I think so. And what I hear time and time again is so many people associate building endurance with running, right? And so many people don't like running. But like you mentioned, there's swimming, there's rowing, there's maybe you're doing metcons, they like to call it in CrossFit.
Absolutely, that's
Maybe
right.
you're doing carries for long periods of time.
Right,
There's so many ways to build
right.
that aerobic capacity. And I'm sure you would agree with this, that aerobic capacity sets the base for everything else that you're doing.
Yeah,
So to neglect those things in your training is you're missing a huge piece of the puzzle there, I would say.
yeah. Whitney, I kind of think about just so if you had someone with a, I'm just going to be a weightlifter, like a pure, whatever, power lifter or Olympic lifter or some combination of a real, and then say, okay, well, this person wants to, say, for instance, come out west for their first mountain hunt. What goes through my mind is, oh boy, there's a few things you got to be concerned about. If they're coming from the Northeast and they're used to working out in a gym all winter long, and they don't have places to do trail running or some type of really endurance, and their concept is, look, I got on the treadmill 3 times a week for a half hour. I mean, that whole paradigm that they have on fitness, if they really don't understand what mountain hunting, mountain training is about, you're going to have to really change their mindset to be like, okay, look, you may need to go for a 2 to 3, 4 hour endurance type session. To that, they would just be like, no, that's
Sounds crazy.
marathon type stuff. And
Yeah.
for us that live up in the mountains, you're like, yeah, that's pretty good morning. Yeah,
Yeah,
what are you
for
going to do in
sure.
the afternoon?
Yeah.
So just to kind of keep that in mind too. So you may have to, with general populations in particular, kind of shift their mindset over from where they are. Oh, I work out in the gym, and you're thinking, okay, let's just basic strength training. A few exercises 3 times a week is not really going to get you where you need to be
Mhm.
for mountain type challenges.
Yeah. Yeah. And I would agree too. And kind of on the same concept, like we were talking about, just getting in. And, I think I've even heard people, and I've seen people, I've seen it myself this past September, who are strong folks. They're strong individuals. They spend time in the
Right.
weight room. And like you mentioned, the people who are weightlifters, powerlifters, or whatever, you might be the strongest person to show up on the mountain. That does
Yeah.
not mean that you can spend 6, 7, 8, however many days going up and down the mountain on your feet, because I can guarantee you that you might be able to deadlift 600 pounds, but 2 days into that, you're going to feel it's going to be rough really fast.
But even if you said for that individual that has, these super high numbers, could they really handle a 5 mile a day in the mountains? I mean, you know how steep they are. And when you're off trail, you're grabbing for roots and trees to get to the top of the ridge type thing.
Mhm.
So how many efforts does that individual truly have in them if they're not used to doing it as well? So I'd say, once you kind of burn those matches on someone that's bigger, if they're weighing, say whatever, 240 to 260, which is not uncommon, and they don't have that endurance base, they're going to be toast pretty quick. They're just not going to have the efforts in them. They're just,
Yeah.
it's just
Yeah.
fact of the matter.
Yeah, and like you said, it's going to be a rude awakening. And kind of, yeah, back to that original point is, so if you are someone who's listening to this, you're coming from the East, you've never done a hunt like this, as we kind of mentioned, don't go put miles on your feet rucking every single day. Find other
No,
ways to incorporate aerobic capacity work and maintain your
right,
strength, right? If you do like doing strength stuff, that's okay. I'm training for a half marathon, and I'm still in the weight room hitting numbers that I've been hitting this entire time, right? So it's
cool.
possible. You just have to know. And if you don't know, please, like, don't hesitate to reach out to someone who knows, right? I think a lot of times people want to figure it out on their men specifically want to figure it
Yeah,
out on their own, and they think that they know it all, and all of that. But
yeah.
if you want to have a successful hunt, um, build that aerobic capacity in a variety of ways, maintain strength, and that's going to be, I think, your best outcome there.
I think it should be noted, at least if you're up to an acceptable level of strength. And we can talk about that if you want to. For Western or mountain hunts, it's a lot easier to build yourself up and then strength train twice a week at the appropriate loading parameters, as
Mhm.
opposed I've built myself up, whatever. You take, say, 3, 4 months to do it over the winter. Okay, now what's I want to do as little as possible to maintain this strength, and then put all your effort into most likely endurance type activities, which I would recommend. Would you recommend that too, Whitney?
Yeah, and I think too, you can even, in sport, we have the annual plan that we look at, right? And if you want to take mountain hunting and training seriously, you could even set it up an annual plan for yourself where, like you said, throughout the winter months, spend time in the weight room, get stronger, PR on your lifts if you want
Right.
to. And as you start getting into the spring, early and late summer, incorporate more of that endurance. And, like, for example, for me, like I said, I'm training for a half marathon. If I have a weight room session 3 times a week, and even in the last couple weeks, I have PR'd my dumbbell bench press, at, which is, I know, upper body, different than running, but I've also PR'd my box squat. I'm going like just below parallel on there, but I'm doing 1, 2, maybe 3 sets. And I'm doing 2 to 3 reps on that, just maintaining that
Yep.
intensity. So I'm just scratching that itch kind of thing, right? Like, I don't have to spend hours on the platform. I maybe am there for 10 minutes max, and that's
Yeah.
including my warm up to get to that. And so, yeah, that's kind of how you maintain that strength as you start to build more aerobic capacity and spend more time building that endurance. But also, for people to keep in mind, I think a lot of people are so afraid that they're going to lose strength, or that they're
Yeah.
going to lose aerobic capacity if they start just strength training. And that's not true, especially if you're training in the right way. And it's, even if you were to stop strength training entirely and just work on your aerobic capacity, yes, the second you get back into strength training, you might feel a little bit weaker, but it might also take you maybe 3 weeks to get at least back to where you were. You don't lose your
No.
strength capacity, your aerobic capacity, all of those things. You don't lose it that fast. And I think people think you can lose it overnight. That's just not the
Well, and,
case.
and that's a good point too. And to have years of strength training like us old guys do, you can get it back fairly quickly just
Yeah.
with good technique and know how to load that as well. And that's kind of what you alluded to was high intensity, low volume. If you're going to maintain your strength, and that's exactly the way that a chapter in my book on periodization for mountain hunting kind of break it down. And I would go so far as to say, you can go month by month. And Joel and I did that on a couple of his podcasts. It was like,
Hmm.
so here we are at the end of March. What would be your March? Um, what things would you be doing in March? If you don't mind me mentioning what I would do, if I had any type of injury, I would definitely have that taken care of now, because if it's nagging now and
Hmm.
go see someone, either a PT or else an orthopedic, if you have an orthopedic injury, go take care of that now. That leaves you plenty of runway to get that healed up and ready to going for the season. But don't wait until the middle of summer and be like, oh, crap, my knee still hurts. Well, you've got an MCL strain, and we need to get that taken care of. And here it is in the middle of August, and you're going, I got 2 weeks away. Okay, well, you just wasted months not addressing those issues. So,
Hmm.
number one, take care of those injuries. Number two, I think I kind of see it as a transition month. So, the
Hmm.
strength that you've kind of built up, most likely in the weight room, and if you're not really a winter exerciser athlete, okay, now it's starting to transition into more of endurance type capabilities, maybe backing off on some of the strength time and effort that you spent over the winter, and start to transition into yesterday. Matter of fact, I got my first ruck in.
Nice. Yeah.
um, 4 miles. I put on a backpack and saw some elk, actually, which was kind of cool, over
Nice.
in the monument area. So that was kind of fun to get out. Yeah, I'm feeling it. I'm feeling it. My hips are feeling it today. But this is a month for me to start to transition over into the things that I'll be
For
focusing on over the next
Yeah,
few
yeah.
months.
Yeah, no, I would agree with all of those things. And you kind of had mentioned, I think, huge to if you do have a nagging injury or pain or even discomfort. Like I had a conversation with a friend the other day, and he's like, "Oh, I just thought it was like he's kind of working through an injury right now." And he was like, "Well, I just thought it was normal soreness." And I'm like, "Well, how long were you feeling that quote unquote soreness?" And it had been going on for like 2 weeks. And I'm like, at that point, it is no
Yeah,
longer soreness. There's something that's
for
going on
sure.
there that needs to be addressed. So don't try. And I know a lot of people are like, oh, I can work through this pain. I can work through it. And in my early years, I was that way too.
Well, you
But
could do it.
and
Yeah,
you
you could
can,
do it.
right? And the more like knowledgeable I become and the less I'm able to do that, the second I give it 2 days. And if after 2 days, maybe 3 days, depending on like the severity of it.
Right.
And on the third day, if it's still just as bad as it was 2, 3 days ago, all right, I've got a that I go to, I'll schedule an appointment, I'll get it looked at. And even I'm a big proponent, like I said, I'm kind of doing this half marathon training. I go once a week to the PT just for like maintenance stuff, like dry needling if I have any tightness or all of that. And obviously, that's not not everyone can fit that in their schedule, or kind of doesn't look the same for everyone. But that maintenance stuff, and I come from a coaching background where I'm used to having an athletic trainer, a PT on staff, and I think that maintenance stuff is huge. But a lot of people don't recognize the value in that part either.
Yeah,
Uh,
there sure is. It's like a little tune-up.
yeah,
You
yeah,
might
and
not be bad enough to like, look, I need to have something fixed, but it's nice to have a little tune-up, a little
it's like
check-in.
getting an oil change every so often. Like
Feels pretty good.
we can't function just like pushing ourselves like forever and ever. Which this kind of leads into the myth number two that I have down, kind of on the topic of whether it's injury, or just like developing certain qualities for uneven terrain. So myth number two is I need to do, or I feel the need to do, a balancing act of exercises on a Bosu ball or all of these different things to develop balance for uneven terrain. I don't know your input on this, so I'm curious to hear what you have to say. But I guess kind of overarching concept there is people feel the need to, and the same thing happens in sport, simulate exactly what you're going to experience in sport or in the backcountry. And we know that that's not always possible. So what are ways that you recommend to train balance, I guess is what I'm looking for here, or how to train for or expect uneven terrain?
Right. So, in a ground-based sport, football, baseball, basketball, soccer, volleyball, you have a very flat surface. It doesn't really change at all for all intents and purposes. However, if you're going to train in the backcountry, and you're going to be moving over uneven surfaces, and there might be a balance component there, um, you would be best served to just go out and do it on your own. I like hiking sticks. I use them. I think they're great. They help me with my balance. There's always a instance where you're going to have to reach down and take a big step and turn half sideways and
Mm-hmm.
over exaggerate that way. If you want to do it in the weight room, there's two things that are going on here, and the one is the specificity of training. So if you want to get better at hiking on uneven surfaces, go a hike. And
Mm-hmm.
then the person that wants to stand on a Bosu ball, and I know that you just mentioned the words circus act,
Yeah, we'll call
that
it that.
really doesn't have. I know what you're trying to say and trying to be somewhat neutral about it, but I don't see much specificity on one side and transfer on the other. So
Mm.
if you're going to kneel, for instance, on a stability ball and have someone throw a med ball back and forth and say, okay, well, that looks kind of cute. It's really going to help out my balance when I put a pack on. It's not. It's just too far away from anything that's even reasonable to consider. So, if you've got some ankle issues, you could do some uneven ankle raises with weight. Would may makes sense. I don't know if you've noticed, but I've noticed that after a day of hiking, that my lower leg is particularly taxed because you're just
Mhm.
not used to doing all that uneven type surfaces and also those types of contractions as well. So, what I say, just kind of leave it up to your hiking and your walking and your off trail, uh, you know, training, as opposed to standing on an unbalanced or an unstable surface.
Yeah. I
I guess you could make an argument, but it'd be pretty weak. And I know there's some research out there that
yeah.
suggests that it's kind of minimal application as well.
Yeah, no, I would agree entirely. And we see the same thing in sport as well, right? And I think so many, at least early on, and even still is a prevalent belief that strength coaches want to replicate what the athlete is doing in their sport, and that's not entirely possible, right? Like nothing mimics the sport more than the sport itself.
Right. Truly
And,
specific.
and so you like if you're wanting that sport specific training, go spend time playing the sport, right? And then in the weight room,
Right.
we're just going to develop once again, when we were talking about earlier, the qualities. We're going to develop strength, we're going to develop power, we're going to develop speed, we're going to develop endurance if that's needed. And then the sport specific training comes from doing your sport. And
Right.
kind of
And
saying,
which we do when we put a pack on and
yeah,
head off trail or even on a trail for that matter. But
yeah,
I
exactly.
guess it'd be worth mentioning too. I mean, some of the trails that we do around here, a lot of them are long and flat. And
Hmm.
okay, well, you're going to probably want to get on some uneven surfaces or even get off trail and going up down a few hills and do some side hilling as well, because you just can't mimic that well. But again, I've noticed that my low legs get hammered, and I wear compression socks and do recovery type things and he just like, okay, well, after whatever, just say 4 miles up of being off road, it takes some punishment on the neuromuscular system.
Yeah, I would agree entirely with that also. And yeah, I think I mentioned the Bosu ball and all those kinds of things. I've also seen similar research that states that there is not much, if any, carryover to standing on a Bosu ball and training balance, is what I assume they're trying to do, to
Right.
actually developing balance on uneven terrain, or even just simply like I know in like ortho settings, if it's like an older individual who needs to work on their balance, it still doesn't really transfer very much. Maybe do some single leg exercises. Maybe
Smart.
try to like just simply balance on one leg on uneven ground, because a lot of people can't do that. But then we want to throw them on an uneven surface. So maybe try
Yeah.
and just develop, or something as simple like you meant, like doing calf raises or something like that to develop the musculature around that area. But nothing compares to getting out there and rucking, walking, hiking on uneven terrain.
There's two things I wanted to mention about that too. There was a study done at Texas Women's College, and they looked at
Mm-hmm.
uh, I think it was the women's soccer team, and they had incidents of ACL injuries, and of course they track them. And the gal that put together the research was, well, at least she was one of, I'm going to call her one of the lead researchers. She was the athletic trainer for the team, and they went from, I think they averaged over the course of the years that they had looked at something like 2.3 ACLs per year,
Mm-hmm.
and they implemented this Boso ball with the flat side up, and they really kind of eliminated the ACL injuries. And I was thinking to myself, well, that's good stuff, and but we're not talking about a women's collegiate soccer team either. So I'm not sure if you could really make any reasonable comparison to mountain hunting and ACL injury prevention if it's not in that much more dynamic situation in women's soccer in particular. So, is there some extrapolation there? I would probably think that it would be somewhat minimal, but maybe most important is to do exercises properly: squat, lunge variations, squat variations, hip placement, knee placement, foot placement. All those things are going to be critical. And I would also go so far as to say even the way you hike. If you have a tendency to get fatigued, if you're going to be leaning forward, the proper loading of your pack is going to be absolutely critical as well. I like the hiking poles because they take some pressure and they keep me more balanced and stable. And I know I don't have low back issues as much as when I use those hiking poles. So not only resistance training exercise technique, but also some of the other sports. I don't care, running, swimming, hiking, squatting, power cleans. Just make sure your technique is nice and clean, which will be very helpful. Not only get the most out of it, but also for injury prevention. And we could talk about external rotators at the hips and where you're going to squat and body mechanics as well. But that's kind of another topic in and of itself.
Yeah, and interesting. My research brain is going off as you mentioned that study, and I'd be interested to see, like we say, correlation doesn't always mean causation. Like, what was it? The same team as prior years, right? Like, you might just have had a couple people, like
Right.
we know from the research that if you've had a prior ACL injury, you are more likely to injure it again. So like was it the same group of people from year to year that had prior or no prior existing injuries? So that could affect that. And then
Sure.
like
But
did they have a new strength coach? Was the strength coach doing other things outside of just simply the balancing act on the Bosu ball? Like there's so many things outside of what we saw in that study that could have impacted the decrease in ACL injuries that were observed, that I think a lot of people are just, and this is something I feel so strongly about because I am involved in research, is some people just see the title of a study or they read like the results of a study and they're so quick to say, oh, this is what happens and this is what works.
right,
And you're not taking into consideration, like I said, all of these other things that could have come into play there.
right. And even just to bring the attention to that women's soccer team to say we're going to do some ACL research, and really the impetus is to have better outcomes that we had in the past. That all of a sudden everything gets better. The hamstring strength gets better, the quad strength,
Mm-hmm.
the squatting, the training, the exercise technique gets better. And like you just said, is there really a causation there? No. However, in that and they always whenever you read those research studies, you always have the disclaimer. And how narrow that is on these whatever 21 collegiate women at Texas Women's College. We had these type
Yeah.
of results. Good luck on your own. Hope it works.
Yeah, and like you said, it's women, it's soccer players, and these are not soccer players that are going out on the
100%.
mountain and the terrain. Once you mentioned as like right when I asked this question, soccer isn't a flat terrain sport, right? They're not traversing up and down elevation, they're not side hilling, they're not on uneven rocks. So now that we've taken all of those extra factors into consideration here, is simply standing on a Bosu ball going to give us the results that we
Right.
want? I don't really know. So then the question, I guess, comes from that. Like, so we were talking earlier, someone's coming from the East Coast who maybe they're not around certain trails that have this varying terrain. What then can they do if it's not a balancing act or circus act on a Bosu ball? What then can they do to prepare for that?
Well, what kind of goes through my mind is if once you've got the endurance piece kind of handled, let's say, and now we're down to injury prevention, I don't know, ankles, knees, hips, and low back. So core training, multi-dimensional core
Mhm.
training, flexibility around those same joints, very important. Hamstring strength, quad strength, um, and strengthening around the ankle as well. Some of the stuff that I like to do, and I know Joel has his, I think he calls it a side hill series.
Mhm.
Um, but weighted, any of those injury, I don't want to get into too specifics on it, but any of those weighted type exercises on an uneven surface or on your toes, flexibility around the ankle as well will be very helpful.
Mhm.
I like to put weights in the hands of the people that I like to work with, and they have them walk on high toes, forward, backward, and sideways.
Mhm.
Really challenging. You don't have to have too much weight on there as well. I guess if you wanted to, you could probably, I don't know, whatever you're going to go for a 3 or 4 mile rock, you could probably just, use the weight of the pack and then do some high toe walking. And then preferably, and we've already kind of alluded to it, but some specificity in training off
Mhm.
trail hiking would be very helpful as well. So that's kind of the overview. And then there's if you wanted to boil it down a little bit more, you get into specific sets, reps, weights, loading parameters.
Mhm. Yeah. Yeah, and similar, but like kind of on a quick tangent. And I'm curious your thoughts on this. I always like say that I hate super high ankle boots because I feel like I have I have really small ankles, so a lot of the times, some of these boots I just don't even feel like I can get tight enough to where if I were to trip, like I'm snapping an ankle inside of this boot because it's not giving me the support that I need. So I typically go for either lower or like very mid ankle boosts because I feel and I'm confident enough in my training and what I've done leading up to this that I have pretty resilient ankles. And like
Yeah,
we kind of this goes back to like biomechanics, like the degrees of freedom of all of our different joints and stuff. Like if I'm thinking about the degrees of freedom that my ankle has and I'm limiting that in a setting where I kind of need that freedom, I don't really feel comfortable doing that. But there are some people who wear like boots up to their knees because they're trying to
right.
keep their ankle from getting injured. I'm curious your thoughts on something like that.
I think there's a couple things there, and one is if are you wearing a trail runner or
This
you're wearing
past
a
season, I was wearing it was like the Solomon Supercross, which is basically a trail runner,
yeah,
and I did just
yeah,
fine in those. It sucks when you have elk quarters in your pack, but besides
yeah.
that, I did just fine in those.
Well, I think you're gonna gain in mobility and speed what with a trail runner type shoe or a low rise hiker compared to a 10-inch heavier boot. If your feet can handle it, um, then go with the trail runner. Excuse me.
Mm-hmm.
The bottom surface on the boot or the boots, and all the brand names, they're hard enough. If you're on a lot of rocks, it doesn't seem to be an issue. So, but if you do have some plantar fasciitis or some foot issue,
Mm-hmm.
the heavier boot will be a little bit more protective. But I've heard of very accomplished hunters that will wear a pair of tennis shoes during
Mm-hmm.
hunting season, and I'm thinking I couldn't do it. I
Yeah,
couldn't do
I
it.
think the only, like I said, once I was packing out elk quarters, my only thought was I know the hunting boots have really stiff soles. So once
Right.
you're going up,
Excuse me. Sorry.
right, you're good. Once you're going up uneven terrain or rocks or anything like that, the trail runners don't have stiff soles. And so then that's when I kind of was like, a stiff sole would be kind of nice right now.
Yeah. Have
Um,
you noticed anything? You've done the incline, of course, haven't
mhm,
you?
mhm.
Have you noticed anything if you do it in like a pair of gym shoes compared to your trail runners on the bottom of your feet? Just because the way those steps are oriented, they have a tendency to stretch your plantar fascia in particular.
Yes,
It doesn't
and I
come up
have
with you.
I've noticed that. I typically always do it in a pair of hikers or trail runners.
Right on.
I will never do it. Just I'm I'm super short and some of those steps are like above my knees. So,
Couple of them in there, yeah.
and you can get like if you end up having to go off to the side because it is so crowded, like I just don't want to fear like slipping at all. So I always
Right.
reserve with some sort of hiker or at least at
A
the
little
minimum a
heavier.
trail runner.
Yeah.
I see people do it in like Converse, like your poor feet.
Their five fingers, they got on jeans and a flannel shirt and
Yeah.
no water.
Oh
Yeah.
my
They're
goodness. I
typically
would
not from around here.
Yeah, for sure. I would die. So yeah, then I'll move on to myth number three, which kind of we touched a little bit on this with myth number one, but I don't like running, and that's the only way I can develop cardio, or I don't like rucking. That's the only way I can develop cardio. So maybe we just a few minutes diving a little bit deeper into that concept as far as like what are some other ways we can build our endurance, and what can that look like?
Well, we got these other methods that can build up cardiovascular endurance very effectively. If you're going to just push up your VO2, if that's really kind of what you ultimately want to do, and let's
Mhm.
just say it is for sake of argument, um, there's a lot of different methods to do that in how we structure those workouts. I would, if you don't want to rock, that's going to be a problem come your season, especially in the Western mountains. Um, you want to get a pack on your back at some point.
For
So
sure.
I know what you mean, but if that's not their preferred, so if you had, I just say for instance, I'm going to race mountain bikes. I like to race mountain bikes. Your cardiovascular, and to say that you're a higher class racer rider, your cardiovascular is probably going to be absolutely fine. My
Hmm.
concern would be from a neuromuscular point of view, are your legs used to eccentric contractions? They're
Mm,
not. And then as you go up and down mountains, you're really going to feel the impact of those eccentric contractions. If you're not familiar with that, it just means the muscles contracting, although it's lengthening, like going down stairs.
mhm.
If you put your hands on your quads, those are all eccentric contractions. We'll multiply that times about 10,000 and you would have differences in elevation. So you're going to have some eccentric contractions there. Now, if you look at across activities, let's just running, swimming, cycling, there's metabolic pathways that we're going to focus on, say, for instance, different days, and it's not uncommon. So we've got something we mentioned earlier would be a long, slow distance training day. If it's going to be running, cycling, swimming, even rowing. So we're focusing on the metabolism of just kind of oxygen exchange at the cellular level. So in
Mhm.
comes oxygen, off comes carbon dioxide, and we want to have a difference between that. So that's what we're going to focus on. And you can go for a long, slow distance for someone that's just starting out, might be 45 minutes, or it might be 4 hours for someone that has really built up some tolerances and they may be competitive. And then you can go down into on the other end of the spectrum, which would be our ATP-PC, adenine triphosphate phosphocreatine. It happens between about 6 and 10 seconds. So, for instance, you might put together one time a week. I'm going to do these shorter burst type efforts, interval
Mhm.
type training, and let's just say you're going to ride a bike. Um, you might whatever 2 sets of 2 or 3 sets of 10. In if you're doing them correctly, you might have a longer rest interval than I don't know whatever. Let's just say I want to use the time frame. A 5 second effort on a attack bike
Mhm.
with a 25-second rest interval. Do that for a set of 10, break for 5 minutes, do it for a set of 10, break for 5 minutes, do it for a third set of 10, break for 5 minutes. And you would take, in my estimation, that you might take a few months to build up to that type of thing. And then you have all the intervals in between. And there's been kind of a popular zone two training, which would be your long, slow distance, and then zone three, four, five, six, seven, depending on who you're going to look to for a resource. I like to keep it simple, between a minute and 8 minutes, and then manipulate your rest intervals. So all that is just, if you think about that as a spectrum between long, slow distance and explosive type training, just manipulate your rest intervals and how many days a week on what, when, and how much you want to train.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think a lot of people think to develop, and we didn't touch on this part earlier, to develop endurance, not only, like we said, are there a variety of ways to do that, but not just methods, but ways, intensities, time intervals, all of those things. I think a lot of people associate endurance with just long, slow distance. So for the
Right.
person who doesn't know much about training, I have to go for a 60-minute run or a 60-minute bike ride. Like, that's too long. I don't want to do that, or I can't do that yet. I'm not there yet.
Right.
Well, that's cool. So we can break it down. We can do kind of build to just simply running for 60 minutes. We can start running 5 minutes on, walking 5 minutes, and then
Yep.
slowly decrease that walking time interval until we are running for 60 minutes, or cycling, or rowing or swimming or whatever that is. But there's different systems that all ultimately, like, yes, the system, as I mentioned earlier, like an aerobic base helps with the ATP PC system and all of those. So let's hit on those a little bit too, right? Let's do those 10-second intervals, and then we're resting 30 to 40 seconds times however many times. Or, like, for example, in like half marathon or marathon training, maybe you're doing like 400-meter intervals or 800-meter intervals, and
That's
then
right.
you're resting for longer periods of time. That's still developing an aerobic base. And for someone like me, like, I prefer running faster for shorter periods of time than for long, like just the long, slow runs that I'm getting to. I had like my longest run this past Saturday was 90 minutes, and I'm like, oh my God, I'm so bored. I'm so bored. Why did I do this to myself?
Hang in there, Whitney.
Yeah. But anyway, so I prefer the longer or the shorter, faster intervals, and I'm still developing my aerobic capacity there.
Sure.
So it's always, and anytime I'm programming for anyone, and I think you kind of mentioned this early on too, like, what do you like to do, right? Because if
Yeah.
I program or tell you to do something that you don't like to do or you're not interested in, then by all means, you're not going to do it. So
That's
let's
right.
find what your preference is, what you like. And then maybe once or twice a week, I'm going to incorporate something maybe you don't love, but you need, depending on your goals. But for the most part, we want to find things that people like to do because they're going to be more likely to adhere to the program when we do those things.
Again, the methods are many, the principles are few.
Yeah, I've that's actually the first time that I've heard that, but that is there. I've never heard anything more true. So then we'll move into last myth here, and this one is kind of like tying all of the previous ones together. The best way, and I find this happens in both tactical populations and folks who are kind of preparing for being in the mountains. The best way to prepare for a backcountry hunt is to do hard, intense workouts where I'm kicking myself in all the time.
Right. So, really, you're concerned about fatigue management. So, and if every day you're going to do these capacity type workouts, or, oh gosh, what is it? Every minute on the minute, or as many reps as possible within a certain period of time. And typically it's all going to be on this sagittal plane: squat, lunge, overhead press, clean to press, squat jumps, pull ups, push ups, renegade push ups. I mean, we can just go on and on. And then you just do as many as you can, as many as you can, as many as you can. You're just going to probably, if you're doing it at the intensity that the workouts are designed for, which is
Mm-hmm.
do as many reps as possible. That means it is unlimited. If you want to, well, the workout wasn't that hard, then you didn't go hard enough, because you can
Mm-hmm.
always do more reps, is kind of the premise behind those type of workouts. So you're going to become so fatigued that's just going to accumulate. And, when you're younger, and let's face it, you can handle a lot of those workouts a lot easier. But as someone gets older, then maybe a couple times a week you could do that type of training, and then you're going to complement it with something else, is really kind of the crux, as opposed to just hammer, hammer, hammer. And I guess you said the same thing. If we're going to ruck 6 or 7 days a week, you're only going to be able to do that for so long, and it's probably going to catch up to you if your loading parameters are conventional. And we could also say, well, if you're going to, just hammer those capacity type workouts, there's ways to manage those workouts, sets, reps, intensities, and how long the workouts last, to put them on a weekly undulation that could be more manageable. I think what you have to think about too is really what is optimal training. So that would not be optimal training, to do capacity type workouts 6 days a week.
I would agree entirely. And I think And it's for me personally, and as many people as I talk to, I try to convince as many people as possible to have this similar mindset, is minimum effective dose. Like, more and more, if I can go in the gym and I can get a workout done in 30 minutes or less, so I have time to do lots of other things. And don't get me wrong, like,
Mm-hmm.
training is still a huge part of my life, but if I can go in 30 minutes and get a very effective and efficient workout done. And that does not mean that I spent 30 minutes doing as many reps as possible or fatiguing myself. Like, maybe that meant I went in and I was just very intentional with my movement patterns that day, right? Like, maybe I took a step back on loading heavy on the squat because maybe I felt like my movement pattern wasn't as great, but I still put as much intentional, mindful effort. Like, I think that's a lot of things people are something that a lot of people don't think about in their workouts. Like, they want their workouts to be mindless, where and those as many reps as possible, those every minute on the minute, doing as many as you can until you can't anymore. That is a very mindless workout. And
Yeah,
sometimes,
it
like,
is.
I don't mind doing that every once in a blue moon. Like, those can be fun.
Right.
But every single day when we're training that way, like you mentioned, like, it's not optimal by any means. We're gonna hit a wall sooner rather than later, and
Yeah.
then we're going to continue to push past that wall, and then now we're in a position of like, how do I come back from that? And I think that's where a lot of people find themselves, is trying to come back because they continue to just push themselves once they've already hit that wall. But then, yeah, I think transitioning, and it's a mindset thing, ultimately transitioning to a mindful workout and being intentional in my workouts, and training with not just intent in your workout, but having intent in your program, right? Like, don't just go in the gym mindlessly doing things because you want to be in the gym. Like, have an intent and purpose every single time you walk in there, with every single training session that you have. And I think that's how you avoid those just kicking yourself in, killing yourself with every single workout that you do.
Well, there's a few different aspects to that as well. So if you had, if we were to characterize someone and say, okay, well, let's just kind of make this person up. You can you can do 12 pull-ups. You can do 50 continuous push-ups. Your hamstring and low back flexibility looks really good. Whatever, you can bench press 300 pounds. You can squat 445, or
Mm-hmm.
but you can't run a mile and a half in 25 minutes. So really, where are we looking for optimal training? And I think what we're seeing too, and this is, Joel knows this because I rail on it all the time. Your Instagram uh, warriors are out there standing up next to a grease board going, this is today's workout, and this is the workout of the day, and say, this is what we're all going to do. Well, if we take our strength training proficient aspiring mountain hunter and they can't, we need to work on some endurance type capacities to typically or preferably with a pack on their back. I'm not worried about their strength. Their
Mm-hmm.
strength is absolutely fine, but we haven't taken consideration the individual aspects or characteristics of that person. And to do just the workout of the day, which is just a grease board with a bunch of workouts lined up,
Mm-hmm.
and no consideration for what the individual's weaknesses, strengths have, then it's really, the program is suboptimal to say the least, and it might even be detrimental. So
Yeah.
that's, I guess, where us as trainers kind of step in and say, okay, just back up a second. Instead of just doing a hard, mindless workout, let's do a targeted, tactical workout that's going to address your individual strengths and weaknesses.
Yeah. And I think a lot of folks, like, and I've been a victim of this too. Like, I used to compete in powerlifting, and I know and knew at the time that my aerobic capacity was non-existent. So the simple thought of like going for a mile run was like, I'm not doing that because I can't do that, right?
Good. Didn't want to
And
do it anyways. But
for,
you're a power lifter. It's useless.
right, for sure, and it was useless. But then, like, as I started getting into more of this stuff, it's like, I need that. So I need to do those things. I need to address those weaknesses. But I find oftentimes people specifically in these populations, they're very aware of their weaknesses, right? Like people are very aware that they have a poor aerobic capacity and can't run or ruck or move for very long, but they still don't want to do it. They would rather, oh, if I go in and do as many reps as possible on this workout, that itch in a way, I guess. And like we said, there are different varying ways to develop that capacity. But if you're not intentionally, like, in their mind, they're doing that through strength training, right? If you're not intentionally putting time and effort towards the aerobic stuff, what, in my mind, what good is that doing you?
Right, right, yeah, yeah. As opposed to that, tactical approach and address those areas that really need to be addressed. I heard an interesting comment a few days ago. If your house is on fire, just get out of the house first and foremost. So you know that if your primary concern is aerobic endurance, just handle it. I don't care why. We'll figure out the cause later. Quit doing heavy strength training. Think that that's going to substitute for endurance training. So there's going to be a sense of urgency, as we always have during the off season over the summer, to kind of handle this. Is okay. It's time to start approaching some of those endurance needs.
Yeah, and I know a lot of people just hate that so much. But like I said, I've seen it. I've seen people on the mountain in September and they were like, "Oh, I spent all this time in the gym getting strong and then I'm running circles around them." Because like what, you didn't spend any time on the important things, right? And I think just
Right.
people don't realize that, unfortunately.
I got to mention though too. I wanted to ask you, what half marathon are you doing?
So there's a couple different ones that I'm looking at, but the one currently is local to Springs. It's actually an all women's one. It's called like the Valkyrie something, and it's a trail race. But I haven't been doing a lot of like, I've been running trails, but not a lot of trails that have elevation gain. So
Okay.
that's the one I'm gonna do. I've got
Is
to.
it pretty? Is it is significant? Where's the start and finish?
I think it's between start and finish. It's got somewhere between 1,500 and 2,000 feet of elevation gain.
It's pretty legit.
Yeah.
Is
But
it up predominantly?
I'd have to look again. It kind of varies between, but my only goal is to run without stopping. Like I have no time goal. I'm not trying to PR or anything
Yeah.
like that. Like my goal is to run 13.1 miles without stopping.
Good. No, that sounds great. And you know what? Even that, in and of itself, if you can develop that endurance, and of course you're going to be doing it, it will override a lot of deficiencies because you're going to have the range once you get into the mountains and scout and hike and hunt and all that fun stuff. Running is a great way to do it. I mean, I run a marathon and did some halves here and there,
Mm-hmm.
but I couldn't run more than 3 days a week. I just couldn't hold up. So it was typically, a 4, 5, or 6 mile run twice a week, and then there was a long, slow distance on the weekend. And then it was mountain biking in between, just trying to build up some endurance. And
Yeah.
that's a great way to do it. You're going to get there.
Yeah, that's what I found is and actually I don't know if you know who Jason Ralia is, the tactical setting, and then I kind of reached out to him a little bit because he's done a lot with half marathon stuff. And he kind of recommended like a 6 day a week thing. And I'm like, I know my body's limits when it comes to running, and I cannot run 6 days a week.
Yeah.
Like I will be dysfunctional halfway through this training.
Yeah. Yeah. Well,
And so
worse yet, if you get injured, right? So if you end up with a plantar fasciitis, look, I'm down. I can't
yeah.
do anything. And
Yeah,
that,
you
that
have
can
like
happen too.
no days off of that. So I do 4 days a week. I do 2 days of like long, slow distance, zone two stuff. I do one day of like a tempo run, so pushing a pace for anywhere from 3 to 6 miles. And then I
Perfect.
do another day of intervals. So whether it's 400, 800, 1,200 meter intervals, and that seemed to has worked for me so far. But I know if I
Sure.
were to have pushed 6 days a week, like, and I get, because maybe in 6 days a week I could break down my one interval day into 2 days or my tempo day into 2 days, but like I need that at least day in between sometimes to be like, all right, now I'm motivated to go again tomorrow. Outside of that, I think the one full training that comes along with training for a half or a full marathon, like, and you probably know this as well as I do, like being in the mountains, you've got to just mentally go sometimes. Like sometimes your body is like, man, I'm tired, but you're not back to camp, or you've got to go a little bit further. And so you have to keep going. And else, like I said, that 90-minute run that I did this past weekend, oh my God, I was at 45 minutes and I had to tell myself every minute, like, the power of one more is what I call it. So sometimes it's like I just have one more mile, or sometimes it's I just have one more minute, or I just have one more quarter mile.
Yeah.
So I get to that point, I'm like, oh, one more minute. Okay, another minute, another minute. But the
You know what?
mental strength I've built from that is unmatched.
I think that's a great way to apply some of that mental toughness and endurance and also build on it. You know what's interesting too, and I've been around, athletes pretty much my entire professional career, which has been quite some time, but I've always found it interesting that people underestimate what they can do and how strong they are. And I look at someone going, "Oh, you got so much left in the tank. You
Mm-hmm.
have no idea." And then they kind of quit on themselves. And I had a good friend of mine. We went hunting last September, and we were cruising along. We had some miles in. It was day two. Legs were a little fatigued, and I'm like, "Oh, we need to hit that next canyon." And he was like, "I can't do it." And I'm thinking, I mean, I really, I had to pause, Whitney, and I'm thinking, did he just say what I think he said? And I was like,
Mm-hmm.
you're not even. It's kind of reminds me of that Goggins thing. Most people are operating at about 40 to 60% of what they can actually do,
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
and I didn't want to like, draw a line in the sand, but I was like, well, if he said he can't do it, he can't do it. I think it was his confidence, and I was like, dude, you totally got this. This is not an issue. I can see it. Look, that's all I do is look at how much people have left in them all the time. So, at any rate, yeah, I think it's interesting that they can build on that, and they're a lot stronger than they think they are, and they can do a
Yeah.
lot more than they think they can do. With that mindset, apply that in the hunting
Mm-hmm.
situation. I don't care if it's dark when you come back. Turn on your headlight. You can figure it out. Everyone's got an NX map and a
Mm-hmm.
phone, and you're going to be fine.
Yeah.
You'd be surprised what's in that next canyon. It might be
Yeah.
worth it.
I agree. Geez, I could go on about the mental side of things for forever. We are coming up on an hour here. I do end all of these episodes asking guests, what does wild strength mean to you? So, Mike, when you think about wild strength, what does that mean?
Well, number one, I got to commend you on the name of your podcast because it definitely gets my attention. I mean, I've always been passionate about all things outdoors and appreciation for the natural world. To me, the strength piece kind of has its own thing because of my strength conditioning
For sure.
background. Because I
Yeah.
think about the physical capabilities. However, when I'm in the wilderness or I'm out on a hunt, in particular alone, it resonates more with physical, mental, spiritual, emotional. It just kind of brings me closer to a state that I found really relaxing. So I guess in that spectrum between the wild strength, that's kind of more of a 40,000 foot view of what it means to me.
Yeah, I would agree with that. When I'm just like out in the woods, the like peace or which whatever comes over me and kind of like to the mental thing that we were talking about tells me that like I can do anything. If I'm out here
Yeah.
by myself in the woods on this mountain, like when I leave here, I can do anything else. Like anything else is after this. So
Yeah.
I would agree with that one. Where can people, if people want to find you, if they want to email you, if they have questions, where can they find you? And then if you want to speak a little bit to the book that you have coming out, you can do that as well.
Yeah, I'm about ready to go to print with the book. Very exciting. I've got about 70 exercises in there. It covers everything from the scientific basis, biomechanics, physiology, endocrine systems, cardiovascular system. We get into some more tactical type periodization, year-round training specifically designed for the mountain hunter, nutrition, mountain hunting nutrition specific chapter on that as well. It goes into quite a few programs, cardiovascular resistance training, exercise technique. It's a wide breadth, but it's the shoot. What is the name of the book? I've looked in the chapters so much. Sometimes I forget it. Anyhow, yes, I've got it right next to me. I think I'll just show you the cover, which I kind of showed off, but
Yes, I'm so
yeah,
excited for
kind of
that.
cool. It's yeah, the complete guide to fitness for Western and mountain hunting. And I'll tell you what, the other thing that I wanted to put this together is that I think what's happening, Whitney, is that you've got a lot of people that are intersecting fitness and hunting.
Hmm.
And what we've seen is a lot of people just trying to scream over the top of each other. And you end up with these little pieces of the puzzle that really don't fit in anything. You know,
Hmm.
okay, here's what you do for pulling your bow back, or here's what you do for leg strength, or here's what you do for core strength. So I wanted to kind of calm the waters a little bit. Number one, if you wanted to get a hold of me, I've got a website up. So you could order the book through
Okay.
mountainhuntfitness.com. No one's even visited the site yet. So
Yeah.
if you want to get a hold of me through there, you can. mbfitness2007 at yahoo.com is an easy one. And then I haven't done anything on Instagram other than secure. It would be at Mountain Hunt Fitness, and I'm going to be loading up a lot of stuff onto that page as well. Fitness oriented, kind of focused, but also with the hunting piece as well. I'm not hard to get a hold of, I guess is what I just should have said.
Yeah, perfect. No, that's awesome.